A billionaire's daughter had 3 days to live when his worst enemy found the only cure on earth. But instead of saving her, he made him an offer: your empire, or your daughter. The world, from Julian Caldwell's perspective, was a neat collection of assets and liabilities laid out 80 stories below his penthouse office. Central Park was a perfect rectangle of green, a manicured lawn for his kingdom of steel and glass. Inside, the silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the climate control and the final clipped words of a multi-billion-dollar conquest. The acquisition is complete. Liquidate their board stock options. And send Leland Vance a bottle of our cheapest champagne. A reminder of his place. Julian's voice was like chilled steel. He disconnected the holographic call without waiting for a reply, the image of a dozen defeated executives vanishing from the air. He stood, a predator in a bespoke Brioni suit, surveying the city he didn't just live in but owned. Every crane swinging in the skyline, every flicker of data on the global stock exchange, seemed to move at his command. He was not a man. He was a force of nature, a titan forged in capital and control. His private line, a sound he hadn't heard in months, sliced through the sterile calm. It was a single, piercing chime that bypassed secretaries and firewalls. He frowned, annoyance flashing in his cool gray eyes. He answered, his tone clipped. What? The voice on the other end was frantic, choked with panic. It was Anya, Penny's cello instructor. Mr. Caldwell, it's Penelope. She fell? The world tilted. The meticulously ordered universe of assets and liabilities dissolved into a single terrifying point of focus. Penny. The glass of scotch in his hand slipped, shattering on the Italian marble floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the silent room. The mask of the Titan didn't just crack, it disintegrated. Where? He snarled, his voice a raw, unfamiliar thing. Where is she? The ride through Manhattan was a blur of screeching tires and blaring horns. Julian sat in the back of his Maybach, his knuckles white as he gripped the leather seat. Faster! He roared at his driver, a man trained to navigate the city with balletic grace, now forcing the armored sedan through traffic like a battering ram. The city, his kingdom, was now an infuriating, hostile maze of yellow cabs and indifferent pedestrians. Every red light was a personal insult. Every traffic jam was a nail being driven into his chest. He saw nothing of the empire he had built, only the agonizing distance between himself and his daughter. The hospital was less a medical facility and more a monument to wealth. The private Caldwell wing was a hushed sanctuary of minimalist art, soft lighting, and staff who moved with the silent deference of high-end hotel concierge. But the opulence was a mockery. 5 of the world's most renowned medical specialists, men he had ripped from their clinics in Zurich, Tokyo, and Johns Hopkins and flown in on private jets, stood waiting for him. Their faces were grim, their collective genius useless. Mr. Caldwell, began Dr. Eris Thorne, a man whose hands were insured for $10 million. We've run every conceivable test. Her condition, it's an accelerated form of cellular decay. We've never seen anything like it. It's not genetic. It's not a virus. It's spontaneous. Julian's mind, a machine built to process data and find solutions, refused to compute. So fix it. What do you need? A new lab? A research grant? Name the price. I'll build you a goddamn hospital on the moon if that's what it takes. He was reaching for the only tool he knew, the one that had never failed him. His checkbook. Dr. Thorne looked down, unable to meet the billionaire's furious, pleading gaze. Sir, there is no cure. There is no treatment. All we can do is manage her comfort. He paused, and the silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Your daughter has 3 days. Maybe less. The words hit Julian with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. He, Julian Caldwell, the man who moved markets and toppled corporate giants, was brought to his knees by a sentence. He stumbled into Penny's room. It was a suite larger than most New York apartments, with a panoramic view of the Hudson River. But the luxury was obscene, grotesque. In the center of the vast room, his daughter, Penelope, his Penny, looked impossibly small and frail in a bed surrounded by a symphony of silent, gleaming machines. Wires snaked from her thin arms, her skin as pale as the imported linen sheets. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic beep of a monitor, each pulse a tick of a clock counting down the seconds of her life. These marvels of technology, each costing more than a house, weren't saving her. They were merely documenting her departure. He sank into a chair beside her bed, his entire empire, the skyscrapers, the stock tickers, the power, fading into meaningless noise. He was just a father watching his child die. A nurse, her face etched with compassion, entered to check and for drip. Julian, lost in a maelstrom of grief and impotent rage, didn't even look at her. He waved a dismissive hand, a cruel, sharp gesture. "Leave," he rasped. The nurse flinched and retreated, another person rendered insignificant by his pain. It's easy to be cruel when you're hurting. It's a trait Julian shared with his rival, Leland Vance, a man known for treating his employees like disposable assets on a balance sheet. But a person's real worth isn't measured by their bank account or their power to dismiss someone with a wave of their hand. If you believe that, hit the like button. Only people like Leland Vance think money is everything. Miles away from the silent, refrigerated grief of the Caldwell Wing, New York City was roaring with life. And at its heart, in the magnificent chaos of Grand Central Terminal, a boy named Cody moved like a ghost. He was 11 with a worn-out backpack for a home and eyes that saw everything. He wasn't a victim of the city, he was a part of its pulse, a survivor with a simple code. You take what you need, but you give what you can. He navigated the morning crush not with a cupped hand, but with a shoeshine kit pieced together from scraps. His gaze scanned the river of commuters, skipping over the tourists and landing on the frantic, scuffed shoes of a junior executive sprinting for the 7:45 to New Haven. A quick interception, a few deft movements with a brush and cloth, and a crumpled $5 bill was his. It was enough. He bought a warm, doughy everything bagel from a street cart, the aroma of toasted garlic a small slice of heaven. As he turned into a quieter alley, a scruffy stray dog with one floppy ear watched him, its tail giving a single hopeful thump against the pavement. Cody didn't hesitate. He broke the bagel in half, placing one piece on the ground. "Gotta look out for each other, right?" he whispered. The dog devoured it in seconds. Cody's sanctuary, the one place the city's harsh edges seemed to soften, was a 24-hour joint called Dottie's Diner. It was a classic relic of chrome and cracked red vinyl, smelling perpetually of burnt coffee and frying bacon. Dottie, a woman with a cloud of white hair and a no-nonsense attitude that barely concealed a heart of gold, was his surrogate grandmother. She saw him slide into his usual corner booth. "Rough night, kid?" she asked, sliding a plate of fries and a steaming mug of hot chocolate in front of him without him having to ask. "You know how it is," Cody said, his voice full of a weariness that didn't belong to a boy his age. "Yeah, I do," Dottie said, wiping down the counter. She'd moved up from the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina 40 years ago, but she still carried the quiet wisdom of the hills. Sometimes when her joints ached, she'd tell Cody stories her grandmother used to tell her. Tales of folk healers, of remedies made from roots and leaves that grew in hidden hollows, things that modern science had forgotten. "My granny swore by a root she called whisper vine," she'd say. Said it could pull a soul right back from the edge of the grave. As Cody dipped a fry into his hot chocolate, a headline flashed across the small television mounted in the corner. "Magnate's daughter, Penelope Caldwell, given days to live." A photo appeared on screen, a girl with bright, laughing eyes and a cello clutched in her arms. She looked vibrant, full of music and life. She looked like a kid who should be worried about homework, not an expiration date. At a nearby table, two construction workers on their break grunted. "Can you believe it?" one said, shaking his head. "More money than God and he can't even save his own kid. Guess you can't buy your way out of everything." The comment landed like a stone in Cody's gut. He stared at the image of the smiling girl. He didn't feel pity. He felt a deep, profound sense of injustice. It was wrong. A kid shouldn't die just because the world's smartest people ran out of answers. The universe was out of balance. This was the core of his philosophy, the driving force he called sidewalk miracles. He believed the world was full of small, broken things, and that it was up to ordinary people to try and fix them. You didn't need money or power. You just needed to do something. While Julian Caldwell, the most powerful man in the city, was frozen in a state of helpless despair, Cody, a boy with nothing but a backpack and a half-eaten bagel to his name, felt a surge of electrifying purpose. The laughing girl on the screen. Dottie's stories of a mountain route. A soul on the edge of the grave. The pieces clicked into place in his mind, forming a wild, impossible, terrifying plan. He looked from the TV to Dottie, his eyes burning with a sudden, fierce intensity. He had nothing. He was no one. But he couldn't just sit here and do nothing. The sidewalk miracle wasn't going to happen on its own. He had to go make it happen. The Caldwell wing of Mount Sinai was less a hospital and more a fortress of sterile wealth. Its entrance wasn't on the main street but tucked away, accessible only through a private, heated driveway. Men in sharp suits with subtle earpieces stood guard, their eyes scanning for anything that didn't belong. Cody, watching from across the street, knew a direct approach was impossible. He wasn't a threat they were trained to see. They were looking for corporate spies, paparazzi, or kidnappers. They weren't looking for an 11-year-old boy who knew how to be invisible. He circled around to the service entrance, a world of humming generators and clattering laundry carts. He found a spot behind a large dumpster and simply waited, observing the rhythm of the place. He watched the food delivery trucks come and go. He watched the maintenance crews rotate. Then he saw it, the evening shift for the custodial staff. They were a tired, hurried bunch, swiping their badges and barely glancing at each other. As one man fumbled with a coffee and a newspaper, his laminated ID badge, clipped to his belt, snagged on a cart and fell silently to the grimy pavement. The man didn't notice. Cody did. He waited until the group was inside, then darted out, scooping up the badge. He didn't try to use it. He knew it would be linked to a photo. Instead, he walked a block away to a construction site, found a discarded mop and a bucket, and filled it with dirty water. Now armed with a prop, he walked back to the service entrance. He didn't hesitate. He pushed through the door with the weary, purposeful stride of someone who belonged there, the found ID badge clipped visibly to his worn jacket. The guard in the security booth glanced up, saw the mop, the bucket, the badge, and the air of exhausted indifference on Cody's face, and immediately looked back down at his phone. Cody was a ghost in the machine, a detail too mundane to register. He navigated the pristine, labyrinthine corridors, his dirty sneakers squeaking on the polished floors. He found the directory, a sleek glass touchscreen. Called Penelope Penthouse Suite Wing 7. He took the service elevator, his heart hammering against his ribs. The room was breathtaking. One entire wall was a sheet of glass offering a god's eye view of the city lights twinkling like a fallen galaxy. The air smelled of clean linen and faint antiseptic. And there, in a bed that looked as big as a boat, was the girl from the television. She was staring out the window, her expression listless, her skin so translucent he could almost see the blue veins beneath. She looked less like a sick child and more like a beautiful, fading photograph. He cleared his throat softly. "Hi." Penelope turned her head, her tired green eyes widening slightly. She took in his torn jacket and the smudges of dirt on his face. There was no fear, only a quiet curiosity. "Who are you?" Her voice was a fragile whisper. "I'm Cody." He moved closer, leaving his bucket by the door. "I saw you on the news." She managed a weak, sad smile. "Famous for all the wrong reasons." They sat in silence for a moment, two children from different universes, finding common ground in the quiet hum of the machines keeping her alive. "What's it like?" she asked suddenly, her gaze drifting back to the city below. "To be out there? To just walk wherever you want?" Cody thought about it. "It's big," he said, "and loud. And most of the time it's cold. But it's real. I get to see the sunrise every morning." He looked at her, surrounded by beige walls and blinking lights. "What's it like in here? To have everything?" Penny's eyes filled with a sudden sheen of tears. "It's quiet. And lonely. I have everything," she whispered, "but I haven't done anything. I've never even seen a real sunrise. Just pictures of them." In that moment, she wasn't a billionaire's daughter and he wasn't a homeless kid. They were just two people trapped in cages of their own. A genuine, luminous smile touched Penny's lips for the first time in days. "Thank you for coming, Cody." The door burst open. Julian Caldwell stormed in, his face a mask of thunder. He stopped dead, his eyes locking onto the grimy boy standing beside his daughter's bed, holding her hand. The sight was so incongruous, so fundamentally wrong in his ordered world, that for a second he could only stare. Then the full force of his protective rage erupted. "Who the hell are you?" he bellowed, his voice echoing in the large room. "Security. Get me security in here now." Cody instinctively dropped Penny's hand, his body tensing for a fight or flight he knew he couldn't win. "No," a surprisingly strong voice cut through Julian's fury. It was Penny. She was pushing herself up on her elbows, her eyes flashing with a spirit Julian hadn't seen since she'd fallen ill. "Dad, stop. He's my friend." "Friend?" Julian's voice dripped with disbelief. "You just met him. Look at him." His gaze swept over Cody, cataloging the dirt, the worn-out shoes, the cheap jacket. It was a look of pure, unadulterated disdain. A dismissal not just of Cody, but of his entire existence. Comment: kindness is power, below if you're on Cody's side. People who judge others by their clothes and status won't get it. "He's the first person who's come in here and not looked at me like I'm already dead," Penny said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Please, let him stay." Julian was caught in a storm of his own making. His fury warred with the undeniable fact that his daughter was fighting for this boy. He saw the life in her eyes, a spark he would have paid any price to see again. He looked at Cody, who, despite his trembling hands, stood his ground and met the billionaire's glare without flinching. "The doctors can't help her," Cody said, his voice quiet but steady. "But maybe I can." The statement was so absurd, so utterly preposterous that Julian almost laughed. A street kid with delusions of being a miracle worker. It was the last desperate fantasy of a drowning man. But as he looked at Penny's hopeful, pleading face, and then back at the strange, determined boy, he realized he was drowning. And he would grab onto anything. "Fine," Julian clipped out, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. "You can stay. For now. But if you give my daughter 1 ounce of false hope, I will personally destroy you." The false hope Julian had accused him of offering felt like a lead weight in Cody's stomach. He stayed until Penny drifted into a restless, medicated sleep, her breathing shallow. He knew then, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the answer wasn't in this pristine, sterile cage. The doctors had reached their limit. Now it was his turn. Slipping out of the hospital was easier than getting in. He was just a ghost again, merging with the shadows of the service corridors and disappearing into the cold Manhattan night. He didn't run from the city. He ran towards his only source of truth, Dottie's diner. He found her in the early hours before dawn, wiping down the counter, the diner empty except for the hum of the coffee machine. He laid out his impossible plan in a torrent of whispered words. Dottie listened, her face a mask of concern, her hands never stopping their methodical circles with a cleaning rag. She saw the wildness in his eyes, but beneath it, a core of unshakable resolve. This wasn't a childish fantasy. It was a mission. She sighed, a sound heavy with worry, and disappeared into the back. She returned not with questions but with provisions. First, a steaming thermos of her thickest chicken noodle soup. Second, a worn, creased bus map of the East Coast. Finally, she untied the knot on her apron and pulled out a small, worn leather pouch. She emptied its contents onto the counter, a collection of crumpled bills and coins. $47.38. Her life savings. "It's not much," she said, her voice thick, "but it'll get you started." She pointed a trembling finger at a spot on the map where the neat grid of highways dissolved into a rugged swirl of green. "The Blue Ridge Mountains. My grandmother used to talk about a man who lived deep in the hills, away from everyone. Said he knew the old ways. His name was Silas. Lived on a place they called Whisper Mountain." She looked him dead in the eye, her expression fierce. "Cody, this is dangerous. These are not city streets. People get lost in those mountains and are never seen again." "I have to try, Dottie," he said, stuffing the money and map into his backpack. "I promised." The bus ride was a descent into darkness. The glittering spires of Manhattan receded, replaced by the endless, monotonous suburbs of New Jersey, then the flat plains of Delaware and Maryland. Cody watched the city lights fade until there was nothing but his own reflection in the dark glass, a small, lonely boy heading toward an impossible goal. The bus hissed to a stop hours later at a desolate depot in rural Virginia, its final destination. He was still hundreds of miles from Whisper Mountain. He found the train tracks by following the mournful sound of a distant horn. The freight train was a monstrous, moving wall of steel and shadow. His heart hammered against his ribs as he ran alongside it, looking for an open boxcar. The ground shook, the noise was deafening. He saw his chance, an open door on a grain car, and in a surge of adrenaline, he threw his backpack in and hauled himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. The ride was brutal. The cold wind whipped through the open door, cutting through his thin jacket. The car rattled and swayed with a bone-jarring violence that made his teeth ache. He huddled in a corner, sipping Dottie's soup for warmth, the roaring of the wheels a constant reminder of how far he was from everything he knew. The clock was ticking. Less than 48 hours now. The train slowed at dawn near a nameless junction in the Appalachian foothills, and he jumped, rolling into a ditch of wet leaves. His journey on foot had begun. The world here was different. The air was sharp and smelled of pine and damp earth. The silence was immense, broken only by the rustle of unseen animals and the cry of a distant hawk. This wilderness was more intimidating than any city alley. He followed the map as best he could, but soon the roads turned to dirt tracks, and the tracks dwindled into faint animal trails. He was alone in a vast, indifferent ocean of trees. By midday he reached a tiny, dilapidated town clinging to a mountainside. It was little more than a gas station, a church, and a handful of houses with peeling paint. He asked the grizzled old man running the station about Whisper Mountain and a hermit named Silas. The man eyed Cody's city clothes with deep suspicion, spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground, and just shook his head. "Ain't no one up there but ghosts, boy. Best you turn around." Others offered similar responses, their faces closed and wary. He was an outsider, a stray, and they weren't offering any help. He had no choice but to rely on Dottie's last piece of advice. Granny said his cabin was hidden near the river that flows from the mountain's shadow. He found the river and began to follow it upstream, a grueling uphill climb. The terrain grew steeper, the forest thicker. Hunger gnawed at his stomach. The soup was long gone. Thorns and branches tore at his clothes and skin. Every muscle ached. As dusk began to settle, casting long, menacing shadows through the trees, despair began to creep in. He was exhausted, lost, and utterly alone. He was so tired he didn't see the gnarled tree roots snaking across the path. His foot caught, and he went down hard, his right knee smashing against a sharp, moss-covered rock. A hot, searing pain shot up his leg. He cried out, the sound swallowed by the forest. He looked down. Blood was soaking through his jeans, a dark, vivid crimson. The pain was dizzying. For a single, crushing moment he thought about giving up. The mountain was too big. He was too small. It was impossible. But then a face swam into his vision. Penny, pale and fragile in her hospital bed, her eyes full of a quiet, trusting hope. He had made a promise. He gritted his teeth against the pain, his jaw tight with a resolve that came from somewhere deeper than muscle and bone. He whispered her name into the silent woods, a prayer and a vow. "Penny." He grabbed onto a sapling and slowly, agonizingly, pulled himself back to his feet. He tore a strip of fabric from the bottom of his shirt and tied it tightly around his bleeding knee. He looked up, his eyes fixed on the dark, imposing peak of Whisper Mountain against the twilight sky. The pain was just noise. The fear was just a shadow. The only thing that was real was the promise. Hit subscribe if you believe in fighting for what's right, no matter how hard it gets. Only quitters and people who make excuses won't. The last few hours were a delirious blur of pain and determination. Night had fallen completely, and the forest had transformed into a labyrinth of black shapes and unsettling noises. Cody limped onward, his world narrowed to the sound of the river beside him, a gurgling, constant guide in the oppressive darkness. His knee throbbed with every step, a fiery counterpoint to the icy chill in the air. He was running on something beyond physical energy now, a raw, stubborn refusal to fail. Then he heard it. A low, distant rumble that grew steadily into a roar. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of falling water. He pushed through a final thicket of rhododendron and stopped, his breath catching in his throat. A waterfall cascaded down a sheer rock face, a curtain of silver and white in the moonlight, its spray creating a perpetual mist that hung in the air. And there, tucked into an alcove behind the rushing water, was a cabin. It was small and solid, built of dark wood and stone, with a thin curl of smoke rising from its chimney. It looked less like a magical hut and more like a part of the mountain itself. He scrambled over slick, mossy rocks, the roar of the water deafening, and knocked on the heavy wooden door. It swung open slowly, revealing a man who seemed carved from the same ancient wood as his home. He wasn't a wizard from a fairy tale. He was weathered and lean, with long graying hair tied back from a face etched with the lines of solitude and grief. His eyes were the most startling part. Sharp and intelligent, they seemed to see right through Cody's exhaustion and pain to the core of his intent. "Who are you and what trouble have you brought to my door?" The man's voice was deep and steady like the river. "Are you Silas?" Cody asked, his own voice sounding thin and childish against the waterfall's roar. The man nodded slowly, his piercing gaze never leaving Cody's face. "I need your help," Cody pleaded, the words tumbling out. "There's a girl in New York. Her name is Penny. She's dying. The doctors gave up. I heard. Dottie told me you knew the old ways." Silas studied him for a long, silent moment. He wasn't looking at Cody's torn clothes or the makeshift bandage on his bloody knee. He was looking for something else. "Why do you care for this rich man's daughter?" he asked, his tone devoid of sympathy. "What do you gain from this journey?" The question was a test, but not one of riddles. It was a test of the heart. Cody looked up, confused by the question. Gain? He hadn't even considered it. "I don't gain anything," he said, his answer simple and honest. I don't want her to die. She's just a kid." Silas's expression remained unreadable. "What is her family name?" "Caldwell," Cody said. "Her father is Julian Caldwell." The name landed in the space between them like a physical blow. A flicker of something dark and ancient, a deep, settled rage, flared in Silas's eyes. His face hardened into a mask of stone. "Caldwell," he repeated, the name a curse on his tongue. He turned and pointed a trembling finger at the very river Cody had followed. Years ago, a company owned by Julian Caldwell, a subsidiary called Apex Manufacturing, bought the land upstream. They talked of jobs and progress. What they brought was poison. His voice grew low, laced with a bitterness that had festered for years. "They dumped their chemical waste into the creeks that feed this river. The fish went belly up. The deer grew sick. And my wife, Elara, she developed a wasting sickness. A cellular decay the doctors in the city had no name for." Silas looked at Cody, and for the first time, the boy saw the profound, bottomless grief in the man's eyes. "She faded away right here in this cabin. Julian Caldwell's progress killed her." He turned back, his voice turning to ice. "Yes, boy. I have the root you seek. It's called Whisper Vine. It is the only thing on this earth that can fight that sickness. And I would sooner burn this forest to the ground than let it touch the lips of a Caldwell. Now get off my mountain before you bring any more of your world's poison with you." The refusal was absolute. Cody felt the world crumble beneath him. He had come all this way, endured so much, only to fail at the final step. His legs gave out and he sank to his knees, tears of exhaustion and despair finally breaking free. But through the blur he saw Penny's face again. He thought of her quiet, lonely smile. He had made a promise. He pushed himself back up, his small frame shaking. He had no money, no power, nothing to offer this man but the one thing he truly owned, his word. "I didn't know," he said, his voice raw but steady. "But she doesn't know either. She's not her father. She's trapped in a room hooked up to machines just waiting to die. It's not her fault." He took a step forward, his eyes locking with Silas's. "If you help me save her, I swear to you I will make him listen. I'll bring him here myself. I will make him stand where you're standing and see what he did. I promise." Silas stared at him, the silence stretching on, broken only by the roar of the waterfall. He saw no deceit in the boy's eyes, only a fierce, desperate sincerity, a purity of heart he thought the world had long since extinguished. With a heavy, shuddering sigh that seemed to carry the weight of years, he gave a single, slow nod. He disappeared into his cabin and returned with a gnarled, dark root, about the length of his hand. It seemed to absorb the moonlight, pulsing with a faint, latent energy. He placed it in Cody's trembling hands. "Go," Silas said. "You are running out of time." Cody clutched the root to his chest, a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled his knees. He turned to run, but Silas's hand shot out, grabbing his arm. The grip was like iron. "This is not the end, boy," Silas said, his voice a low, urgent warning. "Listen to me. That root, it is not a cure. It will only buy her time. It puts the sickness into a dormant state, but it will wake again." His eyes grew dark. "And you need to know you are not the only one who has come looking for it. Men were here a few months ago. Men in expensive suits with empty eyes. They worked for a man named Leland Vance." The name meant nothing to Cody, but the gravity in Silas's voice was terrifying. They offered me a fortune for my entire supply. They didn't want to save anyone. They wanted a leash. They knew about the Caldwell girl, and they wanted to own the only thing in the world that could keep her alive. They wanted to control her father forever. A chill colder than the mountain air crept down Cody's spine. I sent them away, Silas said, his grip tightening. But men like that do not give up. They know about you. They know you came here. The race isn't just back to her bedside, boy. It's against him. He released Cody's arm. Cody stood frozen at the edge of the forest, the precious, temporary cure in his hand, the horrifying truth crashing down on him. He had come seeking a miracle and had stumbled into the middle of a war between monsters. The revelation of Leland Vance's plan to weaponize a child's illness for profit is sickening. If you believe powerful people should be held accountable for their cruelty, comment, "I stand for justice" below. Vance and his enablers are betting on your silence. There was no relief in leaving Silas's cabin, only a new, colder kind of fear. Silas's words echoed in Cody's mind, transforming the vast, lonely wilderness from an obstacle into a hunting ground. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves in the wind, sounded like a footstep. He was no longer just a boy on a mission, he was prey. He abandoned the winding trail, plunging directly down the steep, wooded mountainside, a frantic, controlled fall through a tangle of undergrowth and shadow. The whisper vine root was clutched in his fist, a talisman of hope and a beacon for his hunters. He was halfway down a treacherous ridge when he saw it. Far below, on a hairpin turn of the narrow mountain road, a flash of polished black metal caught the moonlight. A large SUV, its sleek, urban design a glaring scar on the rugged landscape, was moving slowly, methodically, its headlights sweeping the forest. Vance's men. They were already here. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. He couldn't outrun a vehicle. He had to be smarter. He scrambled down to the riverbank, the same river that had guided him up, and plunged into the icy water up to his aching knees. The shock of the cold was brutal, but he knew the running water would mask his scent and hide his tracks. He moved downstream, stumbling on slick, unseen rocks, his body a shivering knot of adrenaline and pain. He heard voices then, faint but sharp, carried on the wind. They were out of the vehicle, searching. He ducked behind a large, moss-covered boulder, pressing himself into the wet earth, holding his breath until his lungs burned. Two powerful flashlight beams sliced through the darkness, dancing over the water just feet from his hiding spot. The men were close. So close he could hear the crunch of their expensive shoes on the gravel. After an eternity, the lights moved on. The voices faded. He waited until the sound of the SUV's engine receded before allowing himself a shuddering, silent breath. He finally stumbled out of the forest hours later, a ghost of mud and ripped clothing, and saw the faint, flickering lights of a small town. His goal was a dilapidated bus station, a single lonely building whose glowing sign read Danville. It felt like a sanctuary. He was about to push through the glass door when headlights flooded the empty parking lot. The black SUV pulled in silently, blocking the only entrance and exit. The engine cut, and the sudden silence was more menacing than any noise. Two men stepped out. They weren't mountain locals. They were city predators, dressed in dark, tailored suits that seemed to absorb the dim light. They didn't run or shout. They moved with a slow, deliberate confidence, their eyes locked on the small, terrified boy frozen in front of the station door. They had him. The chase was over. Inside the station's greasy spoon counter, a truck driver named Mac was nursing a cup of black, tar-like coffee. He was a man built like the mountains he drove through, wide, weathered, and immovable. He saw the scene unfold in the reflection of the window, the expensive car, the two sharks in suits, and the scrawny kid who looked like he'd been dragged through hell backward. Mac had a natural, deep-seated contempt for men like that, corporate bullies who thought a fancy suit and a fat wallet gave them the right to own the world. He was about to turn away, mind his own business, when he saw the look in Cody's eyes. It wasn't just fear. It was a desperate, defiant terror, the look of a cornered animal fighting for its life. And in that moment, Mac's simple, unshakable code kicked in. You don't let the wolves get the lamb. Not on your watch. He lumbered to his feet as the two men started toward Cody. Mac stepped outside, planting his formidable frame between them and the boy. Station's closed, he growled, his voice a low rumble. One of the suits smirked. "We're not here for a bus ticket, old man. We're here for the boy. Step aside." "Don't think so," Mac said, crossing his arms over his barrel chest. The second suit reached inside his jacket. But before he could make a move, Mac acted. With a speed that belied his size, he grabbed the half-full pot of stale coffee from the counter and accidentally flung its contents directly onto the first suit's pristine white shirt. The man howled in shock and pain. In that single, chaotic moment of distraction, Mac looked at Cody and jerked his head toward the back of the lot. "My rig. The blue Peterbilt. Go. Now." Cody didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted, his injured knee screaming in protest, adrenaline masking the pain. He hauled himself up into the passenger seat of the massive 18-wheeler just as Mac swung into the driver's side. The engine roared to life with the sound of a waking giant. Mac slammed the truck into gear and peeled out of the lot, the horn blaring, forcing the black SUV to swerve violently out of their path. They were on the highway, swallowed by the darkness, leaving Vance's men in a cloud of diesel fumes and impotent rage. As the miles flew by, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. Mac glanced over at the kid. "You want to tell me why I just assaulted a man with lukewarm coffee for you?" Trusting his gut, Cody told him everything. About Penny, the sickness, the impossible journey, and the Whispervine root he now held protectively in his hands. Mac listened in silence, his hands steady on the massive steering wheel. When Cody finished, the trucker was quiet for a long time. "Big corporations, men like that Vance fella," Mac said finally, his voice raspy. "They're a sickness. They took my family's farm years ago. Found a loophole in the loan, bled my folks dry. They prey on people who can't fight back." He looked at Cody, a newfound respect in his eyes. "You're fighting back." Cody looked down at the dark, gnarled root. For the first time he understood its true weight. It wasn't just a cure. It was power. It was a weapon, a leash, a key to an empire. And he, a homeless kid from the streets of New York, was caught in the middle of a war between ruthless kings. As the truck thundered north through the last vestiges of the night, the first pale, gray fingers of dawn began to creep over the horizon. The sun was rising on Penny's final day. Mac pushed the accelerator to the floor. The race against the dawn was on. Mac's Peterbilt didn't just pull up to the hospital, it laid siege to it. With a deafening blast of its air horn, the massive rig screeched to a halt in the private, heated driveway, blocking the path of a gleaming Rolls-Royce. There was no time for goodbyes. Cody threw open the door before the truck had fully stopped, hitting the pavement in a dead sprint. "Go get her, kid." Mac roared after him. He didn't aim for the pristine main entrance. He ran for the service corridors he knew, a small, muddy whirlwind of desperation. But this time the element of surprise was gone. An alarm was already sounding. Shouts echoed down the sterile white hallways. "He's on the 7th floor. Seal the west wing." Security guards, large men whose calm professionalism had been replaced with urgent purpose, were converging on him. He burst through the final set of double doors leading to the Caldwell wing and his heart seized. The scene was one of quiet, final defeat. The doctors stood back from Penny's bed, their shoulders slumped, their faces etched with the grim acceptance of failure. Julian Caldwell was a broken statue, his bespoke suit hopelessly rumpled, his face a hollow mask of grief. Dr. Thorne had a hand on his shoulder, speaking in a low, somber voice. "The arrhythmia is critical. Her system is failing. Mr. Caldwell, it's time to say your goodbyes." The heart monitor was the only sound in the room, its rhythm a weak, sputtering protest against the inevitable silence. Beep, 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 beep. Each faltering pulse was a countdown to 0. "No." Cody's voice, raw and desperate, ripped through the funereal atmosphere. He was a wild thing in this clean, controlled world, his clothes torn, his knee bleeding, his face smudged with the dirt and grime of his impossible journey. 2 security guards grabbed him, their hands like vices on his arms. "We've got him, Mr. Caldwell." Julian looked up, his eyes dead. For a moment, he saw only the source of his false hope, the boy who had made him wait for a miracle that never came. But then he saw past the dirt and the exhaustion. He saw the fierce, unyielding conviction in Cody's eyes. He saw the gnarled, dark root clutched in his fist. It was insane. It was impossible. It was the only chance he had left. Wait. Julian's voice was a thunderclap of renewed authority that shocked the entire room into stillness. The guards froze. "Let him go," he commanded, his voice shaking but absolute. "Let him through." The guards released him. The entire medical team stared, aghast, as Cody, a homeless 11-year-old, walked past them to the center of their multi-million-dollar medical theater. The room held its breath, the only sound the struggling beat of Penny's heart. With hands that trembled from exhaustion, Cody worked. He grabbed a heavy crystal paperweight from a nearby table and, placing the whisper vine root in the bottom of a water glass, began to crush it. The sound was primitive, gritty, an ancient ritual performed in a temple of modern science. He ground the dark fibers into a rough pulp, then added water from a pitcher. The clear liquid instantly turned a murky, earthy brown, smelling of damp soil and thunderstorms. He carried the glass to the bed. Julian was at his side, his face a torrent of warring hope and terror. Cody gently cradled Penny's head, lifting it from the pillow. "Penny," he whispered, his voice soft but urgent. "It's me, Cody. I'm here. You have to drink this. Please, you have to fight." He tipped the glass to her lips. For a terrifying, heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. The monitor's beat remained weak, faltering. A doctor behind him scoffed, a quiet sound of derision. Then it began. Penny's back arched off the bed, her small body seized by a violent, horrifying convulsion. The machines connected to her erupted in a cacophony of shrieking alarms. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, rolled back in her head. Then the worst sound of all. The erratic beeping stopped, replaced by a single, continuous, soul-destroying tone that signaled the end of everything. Beep. The jagged green line on the monitor went perfectly, horribly flat. A sound of pure, animalistic agony ripped from Julian's throat. "What did you do?" he roared, his face contorted in a mask of grief and incandescent rage as he lunged for Cody. "You killed her." Doctors swarmed the bed, pushing Cody stumbling backward. "She's in cardiac arrest." Charging the paddles. Clear. The scene descended into frantic, organized chaos, a last, futile battle against a war that was already lost. The moment the monitor flatlines is pure heartbreak. It seems like everything Cody fought for was in vain. Don't give up on them. Hit that notification bell if you believe a little bit of hope can change everything. The cynics have already clicked away. Time of death, 6:42 a.m., Dr. Thorne said, his voice heavy, his hand on Julian's shoulder. The medical team stepped back, their faces grim. The fight was over. Julian Caldwell collapsed into a chair, covering his face, his powerful frame racked with silent, shuddering sobs. The terrible, continuous tone of the flat line filled the silence. But then a sound cut through it. A single, sharp, impossible beep. Everyone froze. A machine glitch. It had to be. Beep. Louder this time. Stronger. The flat line on the monitor, which had been a still, dead horizon, suddenly jumped. A single green spike of life. Beep, beep, beep. A rhythm returned. Slow, then steady, then powerful and sure. The flat line was gone, replaced by the perfect, beautiful wave of a healthy heartbeat. A collective, disbelieving gasp filled the room. A visible wave of color washed over Penny's skin, chasing away the pale, waxy gray and leaving a warm, living glow in its place. Her chest rose, not with a shallow, machine-assisted flutter, but with a deep, cleansing breath of her own. Her eyelids fluttered. They opened. The green of her eyes, no longer clouded with pain, was clear and bright. They scanned the room, filled with a dazed confusion, before finally landing on her father. Her lips parted. A fragile, scratchy, but undeniably real voice whispered a single word that remade the world. Dad. The chaos had subsided, replaced by a profound, sacred quiet. Penny was sleeping peacefully, her breathing deep and even, the healthy pink glow of her skin a miracle in itself. The doctors, humbled and baffled, had retreated, leaving Julian Caldwell alone with the boy who had accomplished the impossible. The billionaire sat not in a chair, but on the floor by the bed, his formidable presence reduced to that of a profoundly grateful father. He looked at Cody, this small, grimy savior, with eyes stripped of all arrogance and pride. "Anything," Julian said, his voice thick with an emotion he hadn't felt in decades. "Anything you ever want, anything you ever need, it's yours. You saved her. You saved me." He reached out, his hand resting on Cody's shoulder, a gesture of connection that bridged the chasm between their two worlds. The moment was shattered by the soft, electronic click of the door opening. Leland Vance glided into the room, a smug reptilian smile playing on his lips. He was flanked by two stone-faced lawyers and his own pair of imposing security guards. He looked like a predator that had patiently waited for its prey to exhaust itself before moving in for the kill. "Julian," Vance said, his voice a smooth, predatory purr. "I heard the wonderful news. A true miracle." He glanced at Penny, then his eyes settled on Cody, a flicker of cold amusement in their depths. And this must be the little miracle worker himself. Julian rose to his feet, his newfound peace instantly replaced by a cold, familiar animosity. "Get out, Leland. This is a hospital room, not one of your back-alley deals." "Oh, but that's where you're wrong," Vance said, his smile widening. He casually straightened his tie. "This is very much a deal. You see, I had my own people looking into this little folk remedy. The whisper vine, they call it. And we discovered two fascinating things." He paused, savoring the moment. "First, as I'm sure your little friend's mountain hermit told him, the effect is temporary. A few weeks, maybe a month, and Penelope's condition will return." A cold dread began to seep back into Julian's veins, chilling the warmth of his relief. "And second," Vance continued, delivering the killing blow, "as of 8 a.m. this morning, my holding company completed the purchase of 500 acres of land in the Blue Ridge Mountains, including a charming little waterfall and the cabin behind it. I own the only source of whisper vine on the planet." The trap was sprung. Julian stared, speechless, as Vance laid out his terms with clinical precision. "So here is my offer. You will sign over a 60% controlling interest in Caldwell Industries to me. In return, I will provide you with a regular life-sustaining supply of the root for your daughter. You refuse, and nature takes its course." He spread his hands, a gesture of feigned reason. "Your empire or your daughter. The choice is yours, Julian. And the clock is ticking again." He had him. Julian was completely and utterly trapped. All his wealth, all his power was once again useless. He looked at Penny's sleeping face, then at the cold, triumphant eyes of his rival. He was about to break, to surrender his entire life's work, when the door opened again. It wasn't a doctor or a nurse. It was Dottie from the diner. And behind her was Mac, the truck driver. And behind them was a silent, determined crowd. The nurses who had wept with relief, the custodians Cody had slipped past, the security guards who had chased him. They filled the doorway, a quiet, unmovable wall of ordinary people. Vance scoffed. "What is this? Get these people out of here." But Dottie simply raised her hand. In it she held her phone, its camera light glowing. She was live-streaming. "We heard everything," Mac said, his voice a low growl. At that moment, a well-dressed woman with a press badge pushed through the crowd. "So did I," she said, her own camera crew right behind her. "Mac called me an hour ago. Told me I might want to be here." The color drained from Leland Vance's face. The smug triumph vanished, replaced by the wide-eyed panic of a creature of the dark suddenly thrust into a spotlight. His power thrived in the secrecy of boardrooms and the fine print of contracts. It could not survive this, the raw, public exposure of his monstrous gambit. He was no longer a corporate raider. He was a villain on a global stage, a man willing to let a child die for profit. His lawyers, seeing the PR cataclysm unfolding, grabbed his arms. "Leland, we need to go. Now." They dragged their stunned boss from the room, pushing through the silent, accusing crowd. As the news crew swarmed after them, the empire of Leland Vance began to crumble, not in a stock market crash, but in a tidal wave of shared human decency. The community stood together to take down a corporate monster. Their collective action was more powerful than any security team. Share this story if you believe community is stronger than greed. Let's show the Leland Vances of the world that they can't win when good people stand together. Weeks later, the sterile scent of the hospital had been replaced by the crisp, clean air of the Blue Ridge Mountains. A vibrant, healthy Penny, her laughter echoing through the trees, walked beside Cody down the path to Silas's cabin. Julian followed, his steps measured, his purpose clear. There were no cameras, no lawyers, no entourage. It was just a man coming to face his past. He met Silas not as a titan of industry, but as a father who owed an unpayable debt. Standing before the waterfall, Julian's apology was quiet, stripped of all corporate polish. "What my company did to this land, to your family, was unforgivable," he said, his voice raw with a humility he had never known. "I can't undo the past, but I can honor it. And I can honor the promise your boy made for me." In the days that followed, Julian didn't just write a check. He established the Alara Fund, a massive environmental restoration trust, and he signed over its complete control to a board headed by Silas and the local community. It was more than a gesture. It was an act of surrender, a transfer of power from the boardroom to the hands of the people his ambition had harmed. He kept Cody's promise. Back in New York, another set of papers was signed, this time in a sunlit office with a view of the city. The sterile documents officially made Cody a Caldwell, but the reality had been forged long before, in a moment of shared desperation in a hospital room. The penthouse, once a cold, silent monument to wealth, was now a home. Penny's cello case was left open in a corner, a half-finished chess game sat on the marble coffee table, and Cody's worn backpack had a permanent, respected place by the door. One morning, before the city had fully woken, the three of them stood together on the balcony. They watched as the sky bled from a bruised purple into soft pink, then a brilliant, fiery orange. The first rays of sunlight kissed the tops of the skyscrapers. Cody, who had only ever seen the sunrise from the cold pavement of an alley, felt Julian's hand rest on his shoulder. Penny leaned against him, warm and solid and alive. The city below was no longer a kingdom of assets and liabilities. It was a world waking up, full of stories, struggles, and a million beating hearts. The whisper vine wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. Penny's condition required a dose every few weeks, a constant reminder of their journey. But it was no longer a threat, it was a mission. Silas, no longer a recluse, now worked with a hand-picked team of Julian's best researchers, combining his ancient knowledge of the earth with their cutting-edge science. They weren't just managing a sickness. They were hunting for a permanent cure, fueled by Julian's resources and a shared purpose that was more powerful than any corporate mandate. Julian looked out at the sprawling metropolis, a landscape he had once sought only to conquer and own. Now he saw it differently. He saw the diners, the alleys, the hospitals, the people, the entire ecosystem of humanity that his son had navigated with nothing but a compassionate heart. Their family, forged in the crucible of crisis, had a new charter. Their power, once used for acquisition, would now be used for healing. They stood together, watching the light spread across the 5 boroughs, a father and his 2 children, looking out not at a kingdom to be conquered, but at a world that needed to be healed.